My name is Delilah Crane and I have crossed this terminal 47 times without a single second glance from anyone in uniform. I know exactly which line moves fastest. I know to have my documents out before I reach the counter. I am not someone who gets stopped. So when I saw my sister Renata lean toward the TSA officer, her voice low, her eyes carefully avoiding mine, something cold moved through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I watched his expression shift. That subtle tightening around the jaw that trained professionals think they hide. He looked at me once, then he walked away and two more officers appeared like they'd been waiting just off stage. "Ma'am, we need to hold your documents for a moment." My passport left my hand before I could process the sentence. People in the security line weren't even pretending not to stare. A child tugged her mother's sleeve. A businessman lowered his phone. Then the supervisor arrived. Broad shoulders. Reading glasses he didn't need yet. He studied my passport the way people study something that doesn't add up. He looked at my face, then back down. "Wait," he said quietly. "I know this last name." Renata was still standing near the conveyor belt pretending to reorganize her carry-on. That performance told me everything. Innocent people rush over. Innocent people ask what's wrong. They don't suddenly find their zipper fascinating. The supervisor's name tag read Holloway. He had the kind of stillness that comes from decades of reading people in high-pressure moments. He wasn't panicking. He was thinking. "Crane," he said again, almost to himself. "Delilah Crane." "That's my name," I said, keeping my voice even. "It's been my name for 34 years. He didn't smile, but something in his face softened slightly. Not with sympathy, but recognition. He stepped away and made a phone call he didn't want me to hear. I caught fragments. A case number, a year, 2019. Then a long silence where he only listened. Meanwhile, Renata finally drifted closer. Close enough for me to hear her exhale. That small, satisfied breath she's been releasing my entire life whenever something goes her way. "I'm just trying to protect the country," she said quietly, like she was performing for an audience only she could see. I didn't answer her because Holloway was walking back toward me with an expression that had completely changed. And Renata hadn't noticed yet. Holloway set my passport on the counter between us like he was placing something fragile down carefully. "Miss Crane, I apologize for the delay. You're cleared to proceed." Just like that, Renata's carry-on hit the floor. She didn't bend to pick it up immediately. That half-second of shock was the most honest thing she'd done all morning. "That's no, I told you the documents." "Ma'am." Holloway's voice didn't rise, didn't sharpen. It simply closed a door. "The documents are valid, have been valid. If you have a separate concern, there's a process for that. Today is not that process." I picked up my passport. My hands were steady. I'd earned that steadiness through years of Renata, years of her casually dismantling things I'd built, then handing me the wreckage with a sympathetic smile. But I didn't walk away yet. "What was the phone call?" I asked Holloway quietly. He looked at me for a moment, weighing something. "Your father," he finally said, "filed a legal protection record in 2019. Flagged your name specifically. Said someone in your family might try something like this one day." The air left my lungs completely. My father had been dead for 6 years, which meant he'd done it before he died, knowing exactly who he was protecting me from. I sat at my gate for a long time before I touched my phone. Dad had known, not suspected, known. Known specifically enough to file legal documentation, to use precise language, to anticipate an airport scenario so accurately it felt less like foresight and more like surveillance from beyond. I pulled up the only voicemail I'd never deleted. His voice, recorded 3 weeks before the hospital took everything. "Delilah, there are things I should have said louder. I said them on paper instead. Forgive me for choosing paper." I'd always thought he meant his will. I opened my email and found the attorney's name Holloway had written on a slip of paper. Margaret O'Zay, Estate and Civil Protection Law. She'd been holding a sealed file for 6 years, waiting for a trigger event that matched specific criteria. An attempt to have me detained using false claims at a federal checkpoint qualified. I called her from the gate. She answered on the second ring like she'd been expecting it. Ms. Crane, I've already been notified. The TSA incident was logged 40 minutes ago. Her voice was calm, organized, surgical. Your father was remarkably thorough. Behind me, I heard Renata's heels on the terminal floor. She was still trying to catch her flight. She had absolutely no idea her name was already in the file. Margaret O'Zay didn't do small talk. Within 4 minutes, she had outlined what my father had built. Quietly, methodically, across the last year of his life while Renata brought him soup and fluffed his pillows and performed devotion like a woman who knew she was being watched. He had watched. He'd documented 12 years of financial manipulation, money borrowed and never returned, a joint account drained 9 days after my mother's funeral. A forged signature on a property transfer that moved a lake house, my lake house, left specifically to me and to Renata's name. I had never known about the lake house. Dad hadn't told me because he knew I would have confronted her directly, and confrontation would have given her time to cover the trail. So, he covered it for me instead, buried it in a sealed legal file, and waited for her to go too far. She'd gone too far this morning in front of federal witnesses. We can move within 72 hours, Margaret said. The property case alone is significant. The TSA incident adds a federal dimension that changes her exposure considerably. My flight began boarding. I stood up, smoothed my jacket, and rolled my carry-on toward the gate. Renata was at the adjacent counter arguing with an agent, her voice climbing. She was already unraveling, and nobody had even told her why yet. My flight landed in Chicago at noon. By 2 p.m., I was sitting across from Margaret O'Shea in her office on Michigan Avenue, and she was laying documents across her desk the way a surgeon arranges instruments. Each one deliberate. Each one necessary. The forged signature was the centerpiece. A forensic analyst had already authenticated the finding in 2019. Dad had paid for that privately, quietly, without ever telling me he was building a case while chemotherapy was stealing 30 pounds from his frame. That image broke something open in my chest that I had to breathe through carefully. He was protecting you even then, Margaret said, noticing. He was always protecting me, I said. I just didn't know the shape it took. Renata's attorney, a man she'd been using for years, someone who'd helped her structure the property transfer, had already received a courtesy notification. Margaret believed in giving people the chance to cooperate before things became irreversible. Renata called me at 4:47 p.m. I let it ring. She called again, then texted a long message full of words like misunderstanding and family, and we can talk about this privately. The language of someone who finally understands the walls are closing. I set my phone face down and signed the first document. My hand didn't shake once. The civil filing hit on a Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, Renata's attorney had withdrawn his representation. That single move told the entire story. A lawyer who helps a client doesn't abandon her the moment papers are served unless he understands exactly how much evidence exists and wants no proximity to the collapse. Renata called our cousin Beth, then our Aunt Patricia. She was building her jury, assembling the family court she'd always used to try me in absentia. Those holiday dinners where I was difficult, ungrateful, too independent, too cold. Beth called me that evening. She says this is about money, Beth said carefully. It is about money, I said, specifically mine. A long pause. She cried, Delilah. I know, I said. She's very good at that. Another pause, and then something shifted in Betty's voice, something loosening. She asked me to wire her $3,000 last year, Beth said quietly. Said your dad's estate was frozen and she needed help covering his final expenses. I closed my eyes. Dad's estate hadn't been frozen a single day. I asked Beth to write that down, date it, and email it to Margaret before she slept. She did it while we were still on the phone. Renata hadn't just betrayed me. She'd been running the same play on everyone. The lake house closed back into my name on a Tuesday in October, 43 days after the airport. I drove there alone, didn't tell anyone. Just followed the familiar road through the trees until the water appeared between the pines the way it always had, gray-blue and steady, unbothered by everything that had happened in its absence. Dad had bought this place the year I was born. He taught me to fish off the back dock, badly, both of us laughing at how bad we were at it. Renata had never loved it here, too quiet, she always said, too far from everything. That's why he left it to me. She hadn't wanted the lake house. She'd wanted what it represented, proof that he'd chosen me, converted into something she could hold. The criminal fraud charge was accepted by the DA's office that same morning. Margaret had called before I left the city. Renata was looking at restitution, potential probation, a record that would follow her name the way she tried to follow mine through federal systems. I sat on the dock until the sun dropped completely behind the treeline. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something quieter and more permanent than that, like a door closing gently on a room that had held too much cold air for too long. Dad had known I'd find my way here eventually. He just made sure nobody could take it before I arrived.